Welcome to Chapter 13 on aggregate planning. We're going to define what an aggregate plan is and look at some strategies for achieving the aggregate plan. So the goal is fairly simple. Minimize costs over the planning period, whether it be a week or a month or a year. The execution is much more difficult. All of the post-secondary schools, this is something that they have to deal with for every term and every academic year. And even in a longer planning phase, if they're developing a new program, it can be a plan for a couple of years. How you do that is the difficult part. So you need to understand your objective, which is to minimize costs. But the ways to minimize costs can vary. You can vary the production rates, the labor levels, inventory, overtime, subcontracting, etc. So we need to come up with a way to deal with this. There are two sort of bookends on the ways to deal with this, and we'll deal with both. And then we'll go through several examples, which I'll record in separate videos. So you have the planning horizon from very short term to longer term. So short term, medium, and long. I've heard a phrase at one point about, and it depends on the industry, by the way, as to what is considered to be long term or long range plans. So this is just suggestions. I have also heard the phrase that you have frozen, liquid, and slushy. Frozen is short-term plans. Just think about your lives. It's fairly frozen. You make changes over the next little while is difficult. Then you have slushy, which means, say maybe in your case, right after you graduate, you're not sure if you're going to stay where you are, you're going to move somewhere else. It depends on the job or the opportunities you might have or whatever careers you decide to pursue. And then you have long range plans, what you want to do for where you would like to be in 5 or 10 years if you've thought about that. So the aggregate planning process involves, you can see it's comes from the capacity decisions and the forecasting. So earlier chapters that we would have taken. And depending on your particular course, you may also take the master production schedule and the detailed work schedules. The aggregate plan is a derivative of a larger plan. There's two fundamental strategies. One is to use inventory to absorb changes. This is called level production. Another point, number two, is accommodate varying workforce size. That is called a chase strategy. And we'll deal with both and hybrids of the two. Again, you can have part-time people, overtime, subcontractors, changing prices, etc. There's all kinds. It's a very complex way to deal with it, and there's all kinds of ways to try and achieve your aggregate plan, and it's constantly in flux. There's been times, believe it or not, where a chair of an academic program thought he had all the people signed up for all the courses, and literally the day the course started, it was a night class, but that morning he received an email from the person who had been contracted and signed a contract to teach the evening class. By the way, I've changed my mind. I'm not going to do it. So the chair had to find somebody in a space of about 6 or 7 hours to actually cover that class that night. So it's challenging. Again, changing inventory levels, but then you have inventory. And inventory may be very expensive. Depends on the type of inventory. Some inventory is quite inexpensive. Changing the workforce. Hiring and layoffs, depending on your type of industry and the particular positions, may be very expensive, or they may not be, because you have to train people. You have to go through the process of hiring. That's not free. And you need to train them how to do the work. capacity operations options, varying production rate throughout time through idle time, and perhaps some overtime. Subcontracting. All of the schools that I teach at use the same methodology. They have a certain amount of faculty who are full-time permanent positions. Depending on a particular school, they may call it part-time. It's really casual. They have contractors because the work is a service, and the demand throughout the year fluctuates. So in the fall term is the highest demand, winter term is less, and of course spring and summer are quite a bit less. So you don't lay off your full-time people for the summer. You still have to keep them employed, but so the contract people are the ones that are not employed, and certain collective agreements between the union and the management actually require a certain percentage of courses to be taught by full-time faculty to maintain their job positions. Again, part-time workers, you people are well aware of this. I would disagree with the filled unskilled or low-skilled positions. Some of you do quite high-skilled jobs, but that's also expensive. So if you've been working at a restaurant for several years and you know how to do a lot of different tasks, close, fill in different positions within the restaurant, that's to me a high-skilled position. Influencing demand by trying to fluctuate demand so you cannot have these spikes or peaks and valleys. That's difficult in operations management and supply chain management to deal with. Extreme highs and extreme lows. And unfortunately, we have seen with the COVID situation, it caused, in some cases, a sharp decrease, depends on the industry, when the shutdowns came into place. So there was a real slowing of demand. And then there was a spike when things started to reopen. Now, other situations, such as like our good friends at the grocery stores, we're not used to having so many people all of a sudden ordering groceries online. I know that in March of 2020, it could take 2 weeks before your grocery order would be ready. That would normally not be acceptable. The normal standard would have been 2 days. And so now that it is currently the fall of 2020, a lot of these organizations have ramped up the curbside service or even delivery to your homes. You can also have back ordering, which is dangerous because somebody might just say, I'm not going to wait. And as you can see, it often results in lost sales. So having back orders is not necessarily a good thing. Counter seasonal product, what that means is if you have a product that sells well in the winter, you need to find something that sells well in the summer, otherwise your plant will be idle. This is something that some schools have started to address. If you think about the way the post-secondary works, which goes from September to April, what are they doing from May to August? It's not less expensive. It's still, you still have to run the buildings, pay for heat, electricity, lighting, things along that line. You're still paying your people, like your full-time people. So you would not normally run a business at full tilt for 8 months and then shut it down for 4 months with hardly any customers. That's why there is a lot of push in some cases to have a trimester system. There's no reason why we can't have more courses offered between May and August. And I know one of the schools that I teach at is looking at doing that significantly. And what that would also then do for a person like myself, a faculty member, is take the winter term off, January to April, and take vacation or not teach any courses. Take, upgrading that we do. So a lot of times it's a mixed strategy where you have, it's not just pure inventory. And of course, that's only available when you have products you can inventory. And then it's not always possible to have a chase strategy either. So that's what makes it challenging. So I've already mentioned chase before, level production, And in this particular case, we're going to make, and we've got our forecasts, we've got our production days, and we're going to make 50 units a day. That would be an example of level production. So no matter what the demand is, you're going to make 50 units a day. It's much easier to schedule that. It's not just the people, it's the equipment, it's the materials, it's how many hours you operate, whether you have one shift or two shifts, things along this line. So you can see in January, they're going to overproduce because the demand is 41 units per day, and you're going to make 50. So you're going to have 9 extra units a day. And you can see the same thing in February and March. In fact, it gets, quote, worse because your inventory builds up. But then in April, May, and June, when the demand is above 50 units, you're going to start drawing down your inventory. And so you got to have a place to store the products, and invest the money. You would not normally build something in January, you know you're not going to sell till April. Like that's not the way businesses do it, because then you're out of pocket for 3 months. Would you normally buy something 3 months before you need it, 3 or 4 months? No, but that's what happens. But then this way, you're not laying off people, hiring people any more than just the normal turnover. So you can see with the level production, which is the dash line, is above. So in the first 3 months, from January to March, you start building up inventory. And then the final 3 months, you draw down inventory. But you keep the workforce static. Like it's not just workforce, but materials, equipment, whatever you need to produce the product. So here's an example. I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time going through the detail on this. I'm going to go through specific examples from your book and show you how to use your textbook or the examples out of your book. So it just shows you the number of inventory units carried over, the carrying costs, and the total cost is $108,450. Said I will go through this in detail with specific examples from your book that are more complex, just like you're going to have on your assignments and your quizzes. So in this particular case, another strategy is to make the minimum and then subcontract. So if 38 is the minimum, you have enough full-time people to make the 38, and then as you need it, you will bring in subcontractors or hire people to do the rest. And that would be the strategy that a school in post-secondary would approach. In fact, some schools have actually taken the approach, they're way below, in this case, the 38. So if you have 38 courses to teach, they might only have, some schools now only have 10, 15, maybe 20 permanent people who will teach those courses, because full-time people are more expensive for the whole year than subcontracting. So this is just a slightly different variation on the level production, but you've lowered it from 50 units per day to 38. And the rest is done with subcontracting. With the advantage is you don't have inventory. That's the advantage. So in the first one, you had inventory for the first 3 months, and then you drew it down. And in this particular case, you have a shortage in January and February, just the right amount of March, and you would bring in subcontractors to fill in the gap between the dash line and the solid line. Again, here's the rates. Here's the calculations. And this costs $105,152, which is less than the 108. Hiring and layoffs. So the reason there's no dash line is because it's the same as the solid line. And you do this with this is a pure chase strategy where you're going to have the number of employees is going to match the production rate that you need. And so again, you have your costs, you do your calculations, and you can see this is going to cost $117,800, which is the most expensive. So in your assignments and your tests, you're going to have to do the plans multiple times to find out which is less expensive. There are other factors, by the way, as far as like, say, quality of service. It is more expensive to have a full-time faculty teach an extra course than it is to bring in a subcontractor. But sometimes you're bringing in these people for 2 hours a day, 4 days a week in a spring course. Depending on the school, it's not that much more. It'd be $1,000 to $1,600 more. But then you have, how are you going to find somebody? And how are you going to find somebody who knows what they're doing? You know, if you bring in somebody who's brand new, there's going to be extra costs for training. Show them how to use your learning management system, access things. You'll have to have other faculty or other people deal with them and help them through the process. So that can be a lot more than $1,000 or $1,500. So you can see that out of the 3 plans, the lowest cost option is here. Doesn't mean that that's the one that you will pick. For our purposes, you always pick the lowest cost, but there might be some advantages for the $3,000. They might just say, we're going to use plan number 1. All right. And rather, it's easier than the $3,000 difference than having, finding these subcontractors. And that's the end of chapter 13. We'll go through several examples with the book, from the book.